now. Did it do it?
It says recording, yes.
Hey. Okay, so we will get started. Modules 5 and module 6. I have all my little tabs up. So
Yes.
this was all about semantics and pragmatics, which for me was kind of the most confusing of all of the language domains. I don't know, did you guys feel the same?
I did feel the same, yes.
A little
Um,
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what even is all
I
that?
didn't know what pragmatics was.
Me
In the
neither.
first couple of resources, I was still like, I don't know. But
Yeah.
then one of the videos simplified it very well. It's like, oh, and then after that, I kept seeing the connection like semantics is the literal meaning versus pragmatics being like reading between the lines and what people are conveying through um
Like
other
inflection in their
conventions.
voice.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I never
Same
realized
thing.
that that's what pragmatics meant. I always thought that like when people use pragmatics in a sentence, it was just like it meant practical. I don't know why, like that's what my brain associated it with. So I definitely learned a lot from these modules for sure. So the first question was, how does understanding the semantic relationships between words, such as synonyms, antonyms, hyponyms, and hypernyms, enhance your ability to teach vocabulary to monolingual and multilingual learners? Which that is a big, uh, it's a long question.
Yeah, some of that terminology was new for me. Like I knew synonyms and antonyms. I even
Right.
remember back in the day when that used to be a major standard in first grade in Georgia.
Really?
Um, like back in the like 2008, 2009, 2010 era of teaching. But I think it makes it easier for kids to understand words when they have something to connect it to. So, like if you teach words that mean the same as a word they already know, there's something that they can connect it to. And then if you teach words that mean the opposite of that, then they have something to connect it to. So I'm like, we need to get back into talking about synonyms and antonyms because I think it helps kids. And I remember reading in one of these that like if they're like it makes it easier. I think it was the Giovanni and Lovell text actually talking about how if you can teach the synonyms of a word and the antonyms of a word that they already know, then you've taught a lot of new words really quickly and expanded their vocabulary really quickly versus trying to teach all those words in isolation would take a lot longer and be a lot harder for the kids to understand.
Yeah, I agree for sure. It made me really think about the relationships between words that I never really thought about, especially when it comes to like teaching vocabulary. I never really thought about how teaching, synonyms and antonyms would actually really, ex if we did it more explicitly, would actually really help them with their vocabulary acquisition in the classroom.
I agree. And I did the semantics, gradient semantics activity with my student for the case study. And I mean, it was just doing the synonyms and antonyms, but was it synonym? Well, no, it wasn't synonyms actually, because well, since he's first kindergarten and my student doesn't speak any, he doesn't really speak.
Mm.
He's super smart, but I think he really has like he's insecure about his speech. I believe because whenever I have him like repeat stuff back to me, he has difficulty um, pronouncing or saying the words, making the speech. So, anyways, that's all topic. So, with the semantic gradient, they had like you do like a 8 to 10 words, I think, but for him, I cut it down to like maybe like 4 or 5, just because of where he's at in his age. And one of the examples we did was temperature. And so I did it in Spanish first and went over the Spanish words for the different temperatures like caliente. It was and then it went to Frio. So I guess it was opposites. And he did really well. Then I took those Spanish words and flipped them to the English, and he was able to put them in order. So I definitely agree with like making the connection and be once you understand the concept of um, the the word, then you can use that to like you said, related to other words. And then it helps in just to put that word into perspective and see where it falls in meaning wise with other words. So we did that for temperature. And then I did another example with him for size, where we went from like grande to poquito. And then which was large to small. So I did it in both Spanish and English. And I tried to like draw pictures where I could on the little flashcards to also help give him a connection. And so I thought that was a challenging activity for, kindergarten
Yeah,
EL newcomer, but I tried to scaffold and modify it as much as I could so that he could do it. And really, once we went over the words, he picked up on it like instantly and was able to order them correctly the first time he did it. So I was impressed with them.
that's awesome.
That's really cool. I
Yeah,
love
I love that. Oh, you go first, Lucy.
Oh, it's okay. I was just gonna say, I love how that activity is so easy to differentiate. You
Mhm.
can use different languages. Like that hadn't really occurred to me to put it in Spanish first if that child, so they can get the concept of it. I love that
Mhm.
idea.
Mhm.
But also you can make it as simple as like big, bigger, biggest, or you
Mhm.
can make it as complex as you want to with using different synonyms that have like near meanings. Like if you're talking about like creep, crawl, words that the more complex the vocabulary you use, the more complex the activity can become. So I love that you can use that with literally any group of students in your classroom at their level.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I love how, I mean, watching the video on the Reading Rocket uh page too that had a lot about that
Mhm.
activity. I just like how
Yes.
it influenced and like encouraged so much conversation about the words and like them talking about their different perspectives about the words too. I thought that was like such
Yes.
a good opportunity for, meaningful conversation
Mhm.
in, partners or a group or however you want to differentiate it too. And it made me think you were just talking about, I love how you did it in Spanish and then in English. I wonder as like for an extension for like multilingual kids, if you could mix the words and
Mm.
have them do Spanish and English with the
I
semantic
think
gradient.
I think definitely for like a setup for yours, it would be appropriate. Your
Yeah.
DLI program where they're learning in both languages. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be like a cool extension to kind of have them talk about the different semantics for the different, languages.
Hmm.
I might do that actually. I just thought about
Yes,
that. It's a
look
cool
at
idea.
that.
Yeah.
Right. Talk about morphology.
Yeah, exactly. And then they also talked about the semantic feature analysis. I feel like this one would be a little bit more difficult to implement in our
Hmm.
classes just because of our grade level that we're at. I think it is a really good like compare and contrast strategy and being able to have a good visual for the kids when
Hmm.
you're kind of comparing the relationship between words. I feel like it would be good to do with like Lucy, you said like big bigger and biggest, kind of talking about the relationship between those words. I feel like that would probably be a good activity for that one too. But I wasn't as big of a fan as I definitely liked the semantic
Yeah.
gradient
Yeah.
more.
I'll go ahead.
I was looking back at my notes and I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for because I'm toggling between your notes and
Yeah.
my notes. But
Me too.
I yeah, I like the semantic feature analysis too because the context is what makes a big difference with a lot of word meanings, right? Like I remember reading about how the word up can mean so many different things depending on the context. And the word run can mean so many different things depending on the context. And we have
Yeah.
so many words that are the same. Like if you say to a kid, hey, run down the hall and give this to Miss,
Hmm.
Dudley,
Hmm.
that kid is gonna literally run
Actually
down the
run.
hall, or catch up to the group, like they're gonna be like, what, up? I don't get it. So
Hmm.
like it just kind of drew my attention to the things that we say all the time that we expect kids to know, when in reality, it makes a lot of sense that this is confusing because we're using these words to mean so many different things.
Yeah, it's things I hadn't thought about before, especially watching the shorter video. for module 5. Um, she was talking about how much word meaning has even changed in the past like 100 years, like
Yeah.
not even a long time really in my mind, that words now completely mean a different
Mhm.
thing.
Yes,
Like
that
Yeah, she
was
was
toilet.
long.
talking about the word nice, right? Like how
Yeah.
it meant one completely different thing. And like toilet is a,
Toilet. Yeah, I thought
That is the
that
one
was
I was like,
that
what?
video was very interesting. That was
Yeah,
the one that kind of put things in. Well, no, that wasn't the one, but that was another one that was just like,
that was a
excuse
light
me,
bulb
as
one.
far as like the dictionary and
Yeah.
the meanings and why it's not like a complete resource or just going off of that. And I was like,
Yeah.
never would have thought of those concepts that way. And like you said, how for English speakers, we take these things for granted, like it's embedded in us. But for
Yeah.
language learners, it can be so difficult to navigate understanding because there's so many different meanings for one word.
Yeah. Everything is so nuanced. And I feel like too it's different because I know in other languages things don't always translate the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Or like
Mhm.
I mean I really only have Spanish as a reference, but sometimes like I'll be like, how would you say that in Spanish? And they're like, we don't really have a word for that in
Yeah.
Spanish. Or like it's kind of a rough translation, like it kind of means the same thing, but not really. So
Yeah.
we definitely do take that for granted, things we just like we've picked up as native speakers that we don't even realize.
I definitely use the term lost in translation a lot. It might have a whole new meaning for that
Yeah.
phrase for me working
Yeah,
with um, EL students. I'm just like, it's just,
lost in translation. Yep.
didn't catch that.
Yeah,
Find another way to say it.
exactly. Do you guys have any more activities? Those are really the only two that stood out to me.
So it's not really a new activity, but when we started, we did semantic gradients back in October, the whole first grade at our school,
Oh,
and we
wow.
introduced it with like shades of color, like from light blue to dark blue, to kind of get them to see like it's all still blue, but it means something slightly different because or it's a slightly different shade. And,
Mm-hmm.
shades of meaning is what we talked about. Um, and then we all kind of, we had like some words that we wanted to do out of a book that we were working with. But we also chose words that worked for the kids in our groups because like I knew that like the words that came with this set were like way too hard for a lot of my kids, so I just made new words.
Yeah.
But the part about it that I really liked is there was like a physical mat that had boxes from like light gray to dark gray. So they could put the words out on that mat
Oh,
and see. I think that that physical step or that like kinesthetic step is really helpful for little kids, which we all
yeah.
teach really young kids. So anything that makes it, more concrete, multi-sensory, I think is helpful for kids. So I saved those
Mm-hmm.
mats and I use them. Mine have spider webs on them because it was a spider bug, right? But just like keep using those webs for that activity because I like how it connects that like intensity of meaning to something they can see, like the intensity of a color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. I like that.
When
To demonstrate or to illustrate
good visual.
meanings. Yeah, very good vision. That's
I
cool.
I saw on when I was watching the semantic which one was it? I think it was the feature analysis one where the fourth grade teacher was teaching or doing the activity, and then on her wall I noticed she had it where it said like I think it said shades of synonyms, but it had where they used the paint chips and it had
Hmm.
like the
Yes.
gradient down. That's a if you didn't have the mats, I feel
Mm.
like that's a good thing, like because they're free at the at like Home Depot,
Yeah,
right?
you can just
Go
go
pick
grab
them up.
them.
So
Hmm.
I think I might do that honestly and go get some of those because I feel like that is such a good visual for ELLs and um monolingual students.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I like that even the questions, had for both ELs and monolingual students because when we're talking about kindergartners and first graders, especially, all of them are still learning words.
Yeah,
Like it's not like I mean, my native English speaking kids, there's a lot of words that I would expect them to know that they don't know. Like
true.
Yeah.
the word like grin or frown, like words that I would consider to be pretty common for
Mhm.
English speakers, but they don't know a lot of them.
Or
So
vocabulary.
I was gonna say
exactly.
that is such
Yeah.
a good segue for our next question.
Yeah, and I wonder what it is that's why it's kind of like regressing, I guess, or
Yeah,
why the vocabulary is not expansive as we would expect it to be. They're just not getting the exposure.
yeah,
But I did want to say one more thing about the semantics chapter, just kind of made me, think about how the county is really pushing vocabulary and
yeah.
having us explore different strategies for it. And at our school right now, our ESOL teachers, the county has implemented the elevation strategy of the month. And so we were using the 360 and 360. I don't remember the full title for the
Like
strategy.
make a move or I know what you're talking
Yes,
about.
make it
Something
move it
along those.
something. And
Yeah,
so
lines.
I was trying to, think about how I could incorporate some of the knowledge and the concepts from this chapter into that. In the middle of it, I'm just recalling the middle of it was the vocabulary word, and then they had to make connections to the word, use it in a sentence. I think one was like define it, obviously, and then there was another square for I think we did illustrations maybe.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, our reading coach, shared with us a strategy that looked very familiar from one of the books from this chapter, where just taking the words and breaking them, doing like the morphology of it, but kind of connecting it to the semantics too. And so I just could appreciate the push towards like deeper understanding for vocabulary and I think just us becoming more familiar with the terminology and but this should be not just at a master's level. I was talking to a
Agree.
teacher about that. This needs to be like entry level for
Hmm.
all teacher for like when you're in undergrad in your
Mhm.
Yeah,
certificate for teachers. This shouldn't be something that a few teachers are learning like years after being into the practice. So I do try to use some parts of our teacher meetings, our team meetings to like share, like throw out quick little tidbits of connections that I've made. And that's something that I noticed.
yeah, I agree. I feel like I have learned so many more new things since undergrad. Like I feel like my first year of I mean, I'm sure everyone's first year of teaching is totally different, but I feel like I teach everything so much more different than
Mm-hmm.
my first year, even my second year, because of all the new things that have come out. I feel like that we're now learning about. So I agree for sure. I agree.
I was also like thinking after reading the core vocabulary article, I thought it made a lot of really good points. And I was like, this is so important. Why are we leaving this up to chance? Like, as a district, as a state,
Yeah.
this is kind of like, left up to how is this school interpreting this? How is this teacher interpreting this? And I know I've had some talks with my teammates about like, okay, I'm trying to assess the standard that says uses words they learn from books and conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I
How?
mean, exactly. Like, obviously, I
How?
talk to my students every day, and sometimes I ask them to use a vocabulary word that we've been learning about. But
Mm.
how are we really supposed to know, like, that they're using the words that they learn from books and from conversations? Words that they're encountering when they're not with me, or words that,
Mm.
um, I'm teaching them either way. It's like, how can you pay super close attention to 21 different kids' conversations enough to truly know that? And it kind of made me think like if it would be really helpful if the State Department of Education or if the county at the county level would maybe provide some words that would at least be a good starting point that we
Yeah.
feel like first graders should know these words.
Mm,
And then I get that that doesn't work for every kid. And I feel like that's their reasoning for not giving us such a list would be like, well, your school has a totally different population than your school. But it would be really nice to see, like, okay, well, if these words are way too difficult, here's another list that you can
Yeah.
use as inspiration. And if these words are way too easy, here's yet another list that you can use for inspiration. Because right now we have nothing. So any resource would be better than no resource. And I think elevation, like you guys were saying, is one of the best things that we have for teaching vocabulary and like even with me, like one of my 21 kids is an EL, I'm still using those graphic organizers for my entire class because they're some of the best vocabulary resources that I've found. Like we're not teaching vocabulary explicitly to all of our students, and it would be really helpful if I had an idea of what kind of words would be appropriate for first graders,
you
you
said
know.
you're not, or you just now are.
I think our school is just kind of like caught off guard by it when
Mm,
we had to assess these vocabulary standards on the report card for the first time. We were all kind of like, oh, wait a second. Like,
yeah.
yes, we talk about words all the time, but it's been really left to chance. And now that we're
Mhm.
being asked to assess it more formally, we're realizing like we're not teaching this well enough. We need to be teaching this better.
Yeah.
And are we just picking book words out of books that we're reading? Are we just, picking words that we think, are we
Yeah.
Googling what are the vocabulary words that first graders should know?
Kind of
Like,
like a sight word list, but for vocabulary.
Vocabulary.
yeah,
And
just
so that's kind of where I was going with the what I was talking about the county and then ESOL strategies was I felt like that we're trying to put like more of a push on explicit vocabulary instruction. But I think like your point is as we're all like turning our focus and attention to that because of this the new Read 180 or what is it? The block, ELA block.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
We're gonna start to find these discrepancies and these challenges where we're going to need like better definition or better um, criteria for how what it should look like. But that did make me think about on the 360 graphic organizer we're using for vocabulary, they did have a section at the bottom that said to tally it. So for the once we went over it for the rest of like the week or until we changed it out, every time somebody used that vocabulary word, which ours was thankful because it was the week of Thanksgiving, we would tally it. And people had to every time you hear it, give a thumbs up. Somebody go tally it on the chart. So I thought that was a good way to kind of keeping it relevant in the classroom. And then it also made me think about the Hadley article, which was for pragmatics, but talked about like the rich language conversations in the early childhood setting. And that teacher was using a lot of anecdotal notes to
Yeah.
mark and tally like the interactions and conversations that she was having with separate students. Now, that's a lot of work. It's a lot to keep track of, but maybe some kind of a system like that would be, you probably have to definitely do anecdotal records more to track usage and mastery of that standard. But yeah, it does sound like having that conversation, at least in a school level, and coming up with like the same standards, criteria for it together would be very helpful.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely need more guidance on selecting vocabulary. I mean, I did the letters program. I was like the first cohort to do it, and they talked about, I know they've been talking more about it with everyone now, but like the tier one words, the tier two words, and the tier three
Mhm.
words. And I feel like that always opened my eyes, and I know they mentioned it in
Mhm.
the core vocabulary article as well. Because I feel like for a lot of my students are ELL, so I feel like I was spending way more time on tier one words when I probably shouldn't have been spending that time because those are just going to be ones that they're most likely just going to acquire. Um,
Mhm.
so for me, it's always hard too to decipher like, okay, is it a tier two word or is it a tier three word, depending on you know, the student's background knowledge. I think that is usually like the hardest thing for me.
Tier 2 or 3 or 1 or 2?
Two
You
or
get torn.
three,
You do?
two
Okay.
or
I feel
three
like that one
sometimes.
would be a little bit more
I I think too
clearly
it's hard
defined.
I think it's hard for me too because I have to integrate all of my content. So like science and social
Mm-hmm.
studies is all
Mm-hmm.
integrated for me. So
Yeah.
it's like do I focus more on the tier two words for my vocabulary? Or I mean I still teach them the tier three words too, you know, like for
Me too.
science and
Yeah.
social studies for those interims and things. So I feel like that's always been a big struggle for me. But yeah, I feel like I would love a list and for them to be like, there you go. I would love
Good one.
that. That would be
We
awesome.
say that now, and then when they hand it to us, we'll be like,
I don't like this list.
"Don't tell us what to teach."
I think that
Yeah.
is like one of the reasons they're hesitant to give us that resource. You know, I
Yeah.
can hear like all the reasons that they would say no when I'm asking for this, but it's like
Yeah,
having a reference point, I think is helpful
the
because if
reference is
all
good.
just left to figure this out on our own, it gets complicated. And Mackenzie, like you were saying with the tier 1, 2, and 3 words,
Yeah.
I like that the core vocabulary article said like that's not always effective because even experts can have a hard time determining like which words belong in each tier and which ones are
Right.
the ones that we should be teaching. And
Like,
like
it's
we're
hard.
three different people with three different perspectives and multiply that times an entire grade level across 62 elementary schools, and you've
Ooh,
got
Yeah.
a wide, wide
yeah.
gap in what people think should be taught.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I I do like the idea that if there's like certain words we teach, we can help kids understand a lot more text if we only had a
Yeah, and
little more guidance on what those words
it
are.
seems like they would be taking that into consideration with our new EL adoption too,
Yeah.
because it talked about how they were the two
Mhm.
schools that were using the two different book sets. That should, I mean, this research should be considered in those selections.
Mhm.
Like we need to expose them and let it be, what's the word? Just expose multiple times, when they say you're going to come across the same word multiple times in different situations versus just kind of being all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the difference between being intentional and just randomly talking about things as they come up. Like
Yeah.
you can't just randomly talk about words when they come up and expect the kids to remember them or start using them. Whereas, like you said, if there's multiple exposures to that same word throughout the day, across the week, it
Hmm.
starts to stick in because, like we were saying earlier, they have to have something to connect it to.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like the first time they hear a word, and I remember reading about this too, it's like if you just kind of explain that word and keep going, they're not going to remember that. Now,
Hmm.
sometimes you have to do that so they can understand, like you're reading aloud a chapter book. You got to explain some of the words to them. You can't teach every single word at a deep level. But
Hmm.
again, it's that difference in deciding, okay, which ones are the ones that are worth teaching at a deep level. You can't spend all your time teaching vocabulary.
Yeah.
So
The
which are the ones that
focus.
are like the most bang for the buck, as it
Yeah,
were.
Well, I did
exactly.
like how that the core vocabulary article did talk about when you were selecting it, kind of not choosing ones that have really known synonyms. I guess that's how they worded it. Like the
Hmm.
word, I guess you mentioned like the word
Mhm.
grin earlier, Lucy. Like, well, grin is like a smile. They have that like concrete, but focusing more on the like tier two words, but more complex. I think the one they used was like incompetence or
Mhm.
something along those lines. And I feel like that was a good like light bulb moment when I was reading it, like, oh, doing things that are a little bit more complex and using those
Hmm.
strategies on those instead of ones that they can
Yes.
kind of
Pick
more
up
easily acquire.
easily.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I feel like that was a good distinction for me. Like, oh, okay, when I'm choosing that, kind of definitely focus on more of the complex and not ones that they can um easily think of synonyms for and antonyms for.
Yeah. Also, it was talking about how choosing words that have close, like a lot of close morphological relatives. So if you choose like incompetent, you're also getting incompetence
Yeah.
or competent, competence. So like
Hmm.
there's a lot of words that you can know if you know one of those and choose
Mm-hmm.
that have that relationship to a lot of other words. I also thought this was really super interesting is that the words that come from different languages tend to work in different ways. Like our words that come from Anglo-Saxon are like our single syllable words, and we change those by making them compound words. Words that come from French are the multisyllabic words that we change with affixes. And then these the different words from these different layers of English can also be synonyms of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then the part about like the Greek layer of English also has like these mashup words that are created by putting Greek words together, but the
Yeah.
meanings in those tend to be more straightforward. And I was just like kind of mind blown by
Yeah.
this whole section of this article because it had never really occurred to me like, oh, where the word came from matters
Origin.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
and
etymology of it.
matters and how we use it and how we determine the meaning of it. But yeah, like I know compound words also used to be like a big thing in first grade that has kind of fallen by the wayside. I'm finding that like stuff that I taught the first few years in teaching with like the old Georgia performance standards are coming back in
GPS.
Mhm. Coming back in this like enhanced literacy block, this extended literacy block, and I'm like thinking, okay, so a lot of the stuff that we thought was important 15 years ago is still
Is
Still
important.
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 We've been ignoring
Now
it
we
somewhat.
now we know why the reading wars is a thing of years and all the back and forth, the back and forth, back and
Yep.
forth.
Pendulum.
Because yeah, because it's like you do stuff at a certain point in the profession for a reason and like made sense at some point, and then you like migrate and get away from it, but then you like
Go back.
find that you needed it. You go
Yeah,
back to it. So it's
Yeah.
like
it's so
trying to find
interesting.
the balance in all of the best practices.
I think what's really maybe kind of at the heart of it is like all of this stuff is important and there's not enough time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So we have to make decisions about what gets priority, and different people think that different things should have more priority. Like,
Yeah.
but it's like, how can you say that it's all equally important when you don't have enough time to teach all of it equally? I think
But
that's
I think as an exposed and experienced teachers, though, a lot of the things that we know we do,
mhm.
we do it in our practice every day, and we just don't realize that we're kind of meshing all of the instruction and strategies and information, and just like that's the beauty of I think teaching and being a teacher is that you're using all of these things daily in different scenarios with different students as you differentiate and teach across curriculum, and you know so I think the more you know and the more you practice, the better you can pull from your toolkit, as I've that's been a word I've heard a lot this
Toolkit.
Yeah.
toolkit,
One.
just so yeah.
Do you guys feel like kids, I guess since we're talking about vocabulary, do you feel like kids' vocabulary has, like you mentioned the word regressed earlier? Do you guys feel like it has from past years?
I think it just kind of depends on where you're teaching
Mm,
and the students
yeah.
and the grade level,
Yeah.
I
but
think I mean, I think there have been some big changes in just like kids in general over the last 15 years. I think it
it's
has
general.
a lot to do with screens,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and something happened during the pandemic that I can't quite put my finger on, but the behavior after has never gone back to baseline for
Yeah.
me. And not that like there weren't behavior challenges before, but yeah, I think as far as the vocabulary, I can't put my finger on what I see as an overall trend. Like my first couple of years teaching, I had mostly ELs, mostly um, living in lower socioeconomic households, mostly not having a lot of preschool experience. And then moving to a different state, having a different population where I still had a lot of ELs, but like we're in a totally different geographical area. And um, like my ELs in Clark County tended to be from one geographic place, where my ELs in Virginia were from all different places. And so that was an interesting change. But I don't think like overall that it has regressed, like vocabulary specifically, I don't think has regressed
Yeah.
over the time that I've been teaching. I think I've always been surprised by like which kids coming from homes where I know that their parents are highly educated, where they read a lot, still don't know words that I would expect them to know. Or sometimes kids know words that I'm like, where did you learn that? Like, I wouldn't expect any 6-year-old to know that word. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's kind of just very individual. But there's got to be like some trends that are identifiable across, like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
larger groups that we could use to help us decide which words
Yeah.
And I
we're.
would think that with technology that their vocabulary would be expanding, because they're
Yeah.
exposed to more.
I guess the question is, what are they being exposed to?
Need to start turning their captions on.
That's
Yeah.
basically reading. Yeah, it's basically reading. Telling you.
Okay, are we still on question one?
I think
No,
we're
we
on question
answered
two.
question two. We answered question two. No, we were talking about the other one was like vocabulary. How would you select and teach core vocabulary words in your
Yep.
classroom to support? So we answered that one. I just didn't
Good, good. Yeah, I
say it
think we
out loud.
definitely are like hitting on like a lot, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, we did one and two. We did one and two. Great. Okay, so the next question is, how does pragmatic competence influence effective communication in the classroom?
Mhm.
I feel like pragmatic competence influences effective communication anywhere. I mean, I feel like
Mhm.
you can't, I mean, we were obviously talking about it just in the classroom, but I feel like you have to have it in the classroom to be able to have it everywhere else, because I feel like you need that to basically survive.
Read people,
Yeah,
read and understand basic conversation. I
yeah,
think one of the articles that talked about the let me see if I can setting the stage. Was it that one where they talked about the speech acts? Is that what they call them?
yeah,
Yes.
SAS, speech act.
That was, informative and kind of put into like a practical application for me, or just kind of let me kind of set like the parameters for pragmatics and kind of just to show me like when it's used in its exchanges with like greetings and like the social interaction aspects of communication.
Right.
So that was good because like I said, at first I was just kind of like, I'm not familiar with this term pragmatics and what it is, what's it look like. And so just having a lot of examples
Hmm.
as a novice learner was helpful for me in the stage act scenarios, the setup for the students in the classroom, and the different examples for how the students could interpret and set up their speech
Yeah.
was good because like the way you say something can come across in so many different ways, just depending on your word choice or your yeah, word choice.
Yeah. I think the biggest example that gave me the light bulb, I think it was, I don't remember which video. It was in one of the videos. But she said, if someone asks you, can you close the window? They're not questioning your physical ability.
Mm.
They're asking you to do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never even, in my brain, I would never even think that someone was questioning my physical ability, to close the
Never,
window.
right? And I
So
actually changed something in my case study based off of that because I was like working with my student. I was like, what I asked him? I said, can you repeat after me? And then I was like, no, I need to say repeat after me because I
after
know
me,
he
yeah.
can.
Like I can do
But
it.
so just go ahead and do it. And so yeah, it makes a lot of points out like a lot of little things that you don't haven't considered before, maybe.
Yeah, I just never think about it when I'm talking.
I liked that in the Siegel article, the pragmatic activities for the speaking classroom. I really liked those speech act sets for helping them understand that stuff because you we include a lot of wordiness to be polite is what I got from like the
Hmm.
videos and the reading. It's like one of the videos was saying like that when it was the Mango Languages video,
Hmm.
it's like when we beat around the bush, we're doing that to be polite.
Polite.
We don't just say, I want to stop talking to you now. We say, oh yeah, look at the time. A lot of the stuff that we do, or like can you close the window? We're implying that the
Make
person
it a
has a
suggestion.
choice. What we
Yeah.
really mean is, would you please do
Yeah,
this for me?
go close the window.
Um, and so like knowing all of that, using those speech act sets, like basically for them to practice what it sounds like to do that extra stuff to make it polite, like the softeners. I remember reading like the
Hmm.
softeners are what we use to make things um more polite. And so like the
Hmm.
speech acts are in these categories of like requesting. Okay, like when we're making a request of somebody, we might say, can you, or could you please, or would you mind? And like
Hmm.
explicitly teaching that stuff, like especially I think for older ELs, like they don't like our kids are young, right? And they
Yeah.
might pick up some of this stuff naturally as they get older, but especially for kids that are coming in as newcomers when they're much older, like I think
Hmm.
they explicitly need to be taught
Hmm.
these things. And I think the speech act sets, it's kind of like a script or a little role play interaction.
Hmm.
I really
It
think
was
that's
definitely role play.
effective. I remember in like middle school and high school taking Spanish classes and doing stuff like that and
Mm.
thinking like this would be really helpful for kids. Just understanding that like the way we ask somebody to help us is different from the way that we, you know, tell somebody that they're annoying us or the way we, do these different speech acts and these different categories. Like commanding somebody is different from greeting somebody, different from complaining about something. So I thought that was really interesting because even though I've spoken English my entire life, it never really occurred to me that these speech acts fall into these categories and that the way we think
Hmm.
about them is just natural for us, but it's really different. Like the way that, and then also like who you're talking to. Like if I'm having a conversation with my
Hmm.
principal, like I speak to her way differently than I would speak to a different teacher, to a
Code
child, even to
switching.
my like assistant principal that I've known for a long time. It's very,
Yeah.
very different for kids to figure out the formality that you use with different situations.
Right.
I
I feel like
appreciated the section on code switching and then the difference also between pronunciation versus dialect, accents versus dialects. Like all of that was just like extra refresh, but like good knowledge to have just, for better understanding. And for me, pragmatics is just like the mannerism of language,
Yeah.
of a language.
yeah, reading between the lines, like you said earlier. I feel like this one's harder for me to think about teaching explicitly. I do really like the speech acts thing, but I think for me, I think about when I was younger, I feel like no one really did explicitly teach me these skills, you know? I feel like it's something that can be explicitly taught, but I feel like it's also just naturally picked up as well. You're
Hmm.
just like lots of conversation.
Well, I've noticed that like my
Sorry.
little EL that I'm doing my case study with, he is very direct with other kids. He'll be like, that was a bad throw. Or
That's not funny, sorry.
yeah.
That's
And he doesn't understand why the other kid is upset with him because what he maybe meant to say was like, oh, you missed, and he doesn't know how to use those softeners in
That's
his approach yet. So, like, teaching him, like, saying that was a bad throw, people feel like you're saying something mean to them, that it's
yeah.
impolite, and this
yeah,
is a nice way to
that is
say.
rude. But
Mhm.
you're just, saying, telling what it is.
Yeah, and he doesn't get it, which is
What?
funny because he's very sensitive himself. You know how like first graders are always right and everybody's out to get them, you know?
Yeah.
So like explaining and I think like you were saying, Mackenzie, like we take it for granted that our native English speakers know this stuff too, but a lot of kids need to be taught how to say something the polite way or
True.
understand like why did my friend cry when I said that they were a terrible singer? They are a terrible
Yeah.
It's just a
singer.
fact. Yeah. They like don't get it.
Just like helping them learn to say things the polite way. Or this is one that gets me all the time because this is a personal peeve of mine. If a kid needs a new glue stick and they
Mhm.
just say, I don't have any glue. And
Mhm.
I teach them to say, do you need more glue? Do you want to ask for more glue? And they'll
Right.
be like, yeah.
Have to teach them how to ask for
Say,
help.
I'm out of glue, so may I
Hmm.
have a new glue stick? Or
Right.
kids who are just like, I need this, I need this. It's not just because they're rude little people. It's because no one
Hmm.
has explicitly taught them yet to say, may I please?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Or could I please? And I'm do that with my kids at home. If they're like, I need more, I'm like, start over. It starts with would you please? And they're like,
Yeah.
would you please get me some more milk? But
Yeah.
yeah, like it never occurred to me before. Like I just considered that I was teaching my children
Yeah.
manners, but what I'm
Exactly.
actually teaching them
Like
is
we're doing
math.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are
That
doing it.
is.
We just do it naturally or like,
Mhm.
without much thought. So it's like, yeah, you know what pragmatics are. You just didn't know that that's
Yeah,
what the name for it
Yeah.
you
was.
didn't know you knew what pragmatics were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you made a good point too about like it definitely happens at home too. Like parents are teaching pragmatics. They don't
Hmm.
even really realize it too,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and then we kind of already did touch on this last question, but how can you incorporate activities that help students understand and use pragmatic elements of language appropriately in different social contexts? Provide examples of how you can teach pragmatics to your students, focusing on social norms, cultural conventions, and context specific language use. Yeah, we talked about um the Speech Act one.
Mhm.
And I liked in the article how it talked to the talk article where it's like, TALK talking about the different ways that you can do it. I like how it talked about free choice centers, how it
Mhm.
gave the example of they had like a discovery center where they placed what was it? Something with like butterfly life cycle. I don't know. They placed it in there to kind of provide a chance for them to
Hmm.
have meaningful discussion about it.
Hmm.
But again, I feel like that's kind of hard to influence them having meaningful conversations in settings like that where you can't really facilitate it. You know what I
You
mean?
just have to throw out the manipulatives for it and let it
Yeah.
happen.
Kind of hope for the best. Like they said
Maybe,
mealtime too. I was like, mealtime, I don't know how much, they're
maybe
talking about
drop some sentence starters or, kind of start
yeah,
the conversation for them.
yeah.
I think that's a genius idea. I love that idea. I'm gonna t like write things on index cards as conversation starters and leave that at lunch because I have been busting some bad behavior at lunch lately.
Hey,
You need to
And I think it's
refocus them.
because they eat quickly and they're bored and they're way less supervised. Like kids who would never act like that in the classroom or like
Showing out
literally
at lunch.
went out at lunch. And I was like, when you said that about sentence starters, I was like, I'm gonna put some conversation starters on the lunch table and see like if that will just get them talking because a lot of them don't know how to have conversations with each other. Here we go, back to pragmatics. Like
yeah.
they don't know how to say, like, I'm really interested in Pokemon. Who else likes Pokemon? Um, I don't like Pokemon. Or
Simple stuff, right?
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
do they know how to say, like, I don't like Pokemon, but I do really like this? Or, do you
Mm,
like playing soccer or whatever it is, getting them because in the classroom, I think it's a really good point. I remember reading, let me see which article it was about how teachers really do most of the talking in the classroom. This is the talk
hmm.
article, the
Hmm.
Hadley but
Hmm.
like teachers do most of the talking, and it's true. Like I know it's true in my classroom, and getting them to have meaningful conversations. It's like some of the stuff I know that they're talking about at lunch is not what I want them talking
Yeah.
about.
It's like, hey, but they're talking,
Yeah, at least
Yeah.
they're like
but you
getting,
want to kind of like
Facilitate it more.
you could channel that
facilitate.
away
Thank
from
you.
bathroom
Right.
vocabulary and
And like
into
Yeah.
And
anything.
like you said, just kind of giving them the sentence structures for conversation and back and forth dialogue. And I appreciated that article because I go back and forth with my students and they're kindergartners. So I have to like rein myself in as like an early primary, well, not early, but like middle primary teacher where I'm used to teaching third, second, and be like, these are like babies.
They
You
are.
gotta be like more lax with them because it'll be like morning time and they'll be working. I'll be like, shh, shh, stop talking. And I have to be like, no, wait, we want them to talk. Talk quietly with your neighbors. And I try not to be that teacher that think about my children coming home to being like the teachers yelled at us for talking in the hall, for talking at dismissal, for talking in the cafeteria, for talking. Well, these are the purposes for being at school so they can have these social interactions and
Yeah.
develop their language skills. So
It's
I'm
like, but
like,
are they
yes.
allowed to talk? Yeah, like
Yes, like yes, dude, especially at this young age where speech and language is so developmental. But like you said, making it guiding and facilitating it more, making it more intentional, more purposeful. I thought the article was good for giving like suggestions toward that, and like the teacher like intentionally took those notes on the different students that didn't have as much speaking opportunities to kind of go and sit with them and guide them in one-on-one conversations and kind of drop nuggets of like information or just directing like where she wanted them to go by with her own questioning and sentence starters, and then keeping track of how often she did that to make sure they had more speaking opportunities.
Yeah.
So, because you could definitely see that. I mean, that's definitely the situation in my class when I'm doing mini lessons. It's the same. It's my same native speakers, the ones that are have all the answers or speaking the best, that know the most vocabulary. And then, of course, my ELs that have little to no English. I mean, it's good for them to hear in context and kind of, I'm sure that their brains are firing synapses and making connections, but they also need that practice speaking themselves. And I was doing that better at the beginning of the year, whipping out my translate and asking questions and making them speak back. And I've kind of fallen back, but need to kind of pick that back up. So encouraging them to, yes, I want you to talk and say something. What is on your mind, just to know what you're
Yeah.
thinking and what direction to go with you.
also I've noticed that like some kids that won't ever share whole group will share with a partner or a small group.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's true.
I've been trying to be more intentional about making time for partner talk during many lessons
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of those things, like I was saying earlier, we're always out of time for everything.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so fitting that stuff in, you do have to be really intentional about it. And it was making me think of this activity I did 100 years ago in county where I gave each kid a linking cube, like a Unifix cube. And we were talking, and it was like the kids got to choose what the topic was. Like, oddly enough, what they were talking about was like all the roadkill deer that they had been seeing on the way to school, and I was very not not into the topic, but there was a UGA professor in the room and she was like, just see what happens. Because this is the most engaged I've seen them about a
They
conversation.
were interested in it.
It's what they wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And so they each had a connecting cube, and if they had an idea that connected, they would stick it onto the train.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I like
And
that.
then we could
Mm-hmm.
start like a new topic train. But it's like once your cube was gone, like you had your turn to speak, it was somebody else's turn. So I liked that for a couple of reasons. It had them focused on like, does my idea connect to this
Mm-hmm.
idea that we're talking about? But also like, is the same person constantly dominating the conversation? And it kind of got them to be mindful for themselves instead of putting all the power on me to decide whose turn it is to speak.
Yeah.
It's like you can speak up, but if you already used your cube, then
Mm,
you need to
you have to
stay
wait.
quiet and
Hmm.
let other people have a turn.
That's
So
cool.
it
I
was
like
really cool. I want to try doing that again.
Should bring it back.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
like that a lot because I do have there's like three or four that just they could talk all day if I let them, because they just have so much to say. And then the other kids just kind of get drowned out a little bit. So I do really like that with the cube, like a good visual of like, okay, I've shared my piece. Everyone has to share their piece. I like
Yeah,
that.
you got to be ready to help those students though
With
with
the share.
initiating their conversation
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I do try to give my ELs chances and opportunities, and I'll ask them a question. They'll just sit there and look at me, and I'll
Yeah.
sit there and wait for them.
Hmm.
So we just be sitting there.
Staring at each other.
Somebody walks in, they're probably like, "What are y'all doing?" I'm
You
like,
got-
"I'm giving them wait time,
Yeah, you gotta give them wait
need
time.
time to process."
Yeah,
Um,
I'm wondering, like, for my first graders, that a lot of them can read. This would be harder with kindergarten, especially if they can't really read at all yet. But like having some sentence stems that are connected to the topic so that they could get a little inspiration from the sentence stems. Because if we were trying to like connect our conversation to a book we read, or you like use certain, or connect our conversation to like what we're learning about in science or social studies, um, then some sentence stems could help.
mhm.
But I like the idea of like the kids getting to pick sometimes. I'm like trying to think of a way I could work that in. Like maybe on Fridays, like we could put, their ideas and I could draw one out and,
Ooh, that'd be
we could
fun.
have
For
a
through the
conversation
week,
about,
you can have a
yeah,
can for through the
that's
week.
like,
If they come up with start talking about things that you don't have time to talk about right now, put
Right.
that in
mhm.
the can, and we'll circle back round to that on our Friday fireside
Friday,
chats.
I
Friday
like
free
that.
share. Friday free, Friday free share. Something like that.
Right.
There's an
I
Right.
like
alliteration
it.
somewhere.
Yeah. Friday free share would be really fun to do. Like
Yeah.
the kids would love it. It could just be like 10 minutes,
Yeah, they
but
always
it
have.
could,
Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, I think they would look forward to it, like knowing that they're gonna get to have a conversation about something that like Miss Dudley didn't pick that they got to pick. I can
Yes.
Yeah.
imagine like all the things that like the Pokemon and the soccer and the
They're always
craft.
talking about something like off the wall. Like
Yeah.
their little minds are just so creative and just, just interesting too to hear them talking what they're thinking. And they'll say like stuff that's not true. And you'll just be like, oh, you're really okay.
Oh,
Like something off the wall that you know is not true. I can't even think of an example, but just let them go with it. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
that's
just have that outlet for them. I think would be
I
good.
will play along all day. Just have a conversation. But
Exactly.
I did want to ask because I did feel like this was one of the harder areas to like have evidence for observation.
Hmm.
So what I wanted to see what were some of your activities for your case study if you've done them yet or you're working. I know we're working on finishing and typing it up. Like I can kind of like role play the speech acts, but anything that my student does is going to have to be like repetitious off of me. Like he's not making any like free form sentences for himself. Like he won't talk. He'll just look at me. But if I tell him and he like understands, so I haven't really quite figured out yet what's going on with him in his speech. Like he'll understand so much. Like I know he understands enough to follow direction because he
Right.
can like produce threes on work that I show, like explicitly instruct and show him a model for. He can go to a seat and do it and
Hmm.
get a three on it. But if I do like introduce the speech act to him and like teach it to him and then be like, okay, now what would you say in this scenario? He'll just look at me. He won't even attempt to do it in Spanish so I could translate it. But if I say, read this, the ball is red, he'll need me to feed the ball. ball red, like
Yeah.
and then it's even like, I just don't know. This one's really hard to get something to have to show as evidence.
I wonder if you could
I
do like yes or no questions. Like, would that be considered like very basic pragmatics of like answering yes to a question or like answering no to a question? Even if it's like, I
It could
don't
all be
know.
like, do you like? Because I'm thinking about the can do descriptors at like, I'm assuming that he's at like level one on
Hmm.
those can do descriptors because one of them is like answering yes or no questions, right? With like
Okay.
nodding or shaking your head.
So maybe having pictures.
You could have like, do you like ice cream? Do you like, things
Yeah.
that kids
You like
like?
pizza,
But
pizza.
is that is that demonstrating pragmatics though by asking him what he likes?
I
It's,
feel like that's such a basic form of pragmatic. I mean, just being able to, it's not like you're like, do you like ice cream? And he's like, uh, sky. Like it's just saying like a random word. So I feel like that is like a super duper,
Teaching like a response, like
yeah, like call and response kind of.
question and response, like him just even being able to acknowledge the questions being asked and
Yeah.
answering it. I was thinking maybe along the lines of like having two picture cards of like maybe
Mhm.
good example of proper speech and not a good example, and then having him he can point like which
Mhm.
one would be the better option. So I might be overthinking it or making it like too complex.
Yeah, because if he really doesn't speak at all, I'm trying to think like, does he talk to his peers at all? Does if like a friend asks him, do you like ice cream? Is he gonna answer them or is he gonna just look at them like he does with you?
I have seen him talking, but I'll be across the room, so I don't know what he's saying. If I approach him or like, like try to do it intentionally,
He's
he
not.
it's like he does it very randomly. And
Mm.
when he does, I believe it's in Spanish, and I wouldn't have to like, so I don't really know. I need to like observe him in his naturally more. Because when I
Mhm.
usually am working with him, like for the whole group on the carpet, he's just there. He's listening, but he's
Yeah.
not participating.
Because I
When
was
we,
wondering if like he would ask other kids a
oh
do you
no,
like question. No. Okay.
mm-mm.
I
Yeah, he's
was
not
at
going to
first I was
initiate
thinking like if you
conversation.
had like play food or something like that you could have him start asking like do you like pizza? Do you like ice cream? Do you like whatever random flavor you
Yeah.
have, getting him to say it. But if you don't think that he'll answer that he would be able to form a question yet, maybe you could
Mm-mm.
just get him to answer questions. Because I do think that is connected to pragmatics, like the way we use language in a social setting
Hmm.
Hmm.
What
is
did you all do with your kids?
Mine's pretty
um,
advanced for speaking.
Yours is advanced.
Yeah, he loves to talk.
That was so
mine
Loves
is
to talk.
is also advanced for speaking. So like for semantics, I gave him a synonym assessment and he wouldn't even answer the ones that he didn't know because he's a perfectionist as well. But it was good because I knew that he wasn't just guessing. Right? But so that was one of the things that I did for semantics. And then for pragmatics, I mentioned this to you guys, but he's very direct. Like, that's a bad throw. You're bad at basketball. You're bad at soccer, whatever it is.
Yeah,
So teaching him like
the softeners.
kind of like you were talking about like two cards, but like which one is the like more polite way to say this?
Hmm.
Um, do we have any more to say about semantics or pragmatics? Because
I'll try to
I'll stop
well,
the
I was just
recording.
Yeah, let me look at that question.
I'll
Just
try to find a way to adapt mine to something like that. I'm thinking it's best, but then like what's the evidence? You just
I mean, then it would be
for the
really easy to come up
appendix.
with
What
his
are you putting in
goal.
your appendix?
In the one that she gave us the example,
Hmm.
he doesn't really have like his examples or like his what is it in the appendix? It's like the lesson that he taught.
Mhm.
Okay.
It
The
wasn't
lesson.
necessarily
It
like
doesn't always have to be a work sample.
I don't think so.
That's what
Especially
I've
with
been using.
pragmatics, I guess,
Word
because
samples and like the activity materials.
yeah,
Hmm.
that's really
Okay.
all he had was activity materials.
And I was actually teaching the I was teaching it like produce like the lesson. I went back and looked at it, didn't have to teach it. You just had to
Come up with it.
say what it would be, the instruction would be. I was actually using it. So
Yeah, that's good
okay.
though. That's good.
Yeah. I
I
think like
feel
that's the whole idea, but yeah, like it doesn't ask us to provide the follow-up of like what they did after the lesson.
Okay. So
Bring
just
it.
as long as I can show what like my resources would be the okay.
yeah.
But
But
no, other than that, I think I was done too. But I mean that was related. So
yeah, it was. I just want to make sure. Yeah.
Because sometimes when the articles we read are talking about like kids in middle school or kids in high school, and then we're
Word.
trying to apply it to kindergartners who are literally not speaking,
mhm.
that's I think it's really helpful to talk about it and draw those comparisons. Like, I think talking about like giving them opportunities for meaningful talk, we talked about ways to like give them some more choices to talk about, give them a little structure and support without like controlling everything that they say,
Mhm.
letting them have a little more space for talking in the classroom, instead of asking them to be quiet all the time. I know like a big thing across schools.
Mhm.
And then just like Mackenzie, I saw that you put something about Nearpod and Edpuzzle, and I was
Yeah.
just curious, like, what do you do in Nearpod? Because I like Nearpod too, so I'm
Yeah.
always looking for ideas.
I saw them in that like the longer video. She had all
Mhm.
she I mean she had that whole list, but the ones that I really liked were Nearpod because we do use Nearpod so much, so I feel like the kids are much more familiar with it. And there's
Mhm.
like already so there was Nearpods just about like conversation, had like kind
Mhm.
of like the speech act things.
Yeah.
But they had already made lessons. And in Nearpod, actually, there's a section that says like English language learners where they have all lessons that are designed around English language learners
Oh wow.
already pre-made and everything. So
I need to
Mhm.
check that out.
yeah,
Me
they
too.
have some cool stuff.
Me too.
Um, and then I liked the Ed puzzle one. She showed the example of where it was like the scene from Encanto when like the sister is apologizing to the other sister, but she doesn't do it very well or like polite, you know. And
Mm.
She's like,
I
I'm
like
sorry, your life is so perfect,
yeah,
right?
so I feel like that's such a fun example because it is the kids enjoy that movie so
Mhm.
much that they're going to
Mhm.
already be engaged with it, and that is such
Mhm.
a good example of like pragmatics and or I guess a non-example of pragmatics, like or not, not being polite or not apologizing the right way. So that's why I put that one. I really did. I liked that example a lot, and she said there was a lot more on that website that had similar things on it.
At puzzle. And just one more thing I want to say for like kindergarten level that I kind of thought of dramatic play. I've been thinking about buying like some dress up clothes. And then like for rainy day recesses, it could be like a play center and then they could role play and I could even go in and drop like little prompts like, oh, why don't you guys pretend that you're firefighters today and you've got to get ready to go put out a fire. What
Mhm.
would you do? Go and just set it off that way. Or and then you can even do that with the pragmatics as far as the
Yeah,
speech acts like, hey, let's role play and then incorporate our stop talk walk. What would you
Yeah.
do if
Because
your classmate is not being nice to another classmate and how would y'all act out how you would handle that situation. They're very capable and that would be like something very age appropriate for them and it ties in many content areas.
yeah. I love that. I feel like dramatic plays, even just like any play centers, are such a
Hmm.
good way to learn pragmatics and just be able to pick it up from your peers. So yeah, I
Hmm.
like that.
I think I'm gonna do
And
that
I
for my
think like
kids.
we don't realize how much like social emotional learning is teaching pragmatics a lot of the
Hmm.
time because having the words to say when you're upset with somebody or ask them to
Hmm.
stop doing something
Hmm.
or apologizing when you've wronged somebody else, all of that is pragmatics.
Yes. And they need the
And
conflict resolution too.
mhm.
Yeah.
And like coming back to the dramatic play, we have an autism unit at our school, and the teacher, I know, like, because for a lot of our nonverbal kids with autism, pragmatics is part of their
Mhm.
IEP.
Mhm.
And um, they do like a store where they make ice cream and they sell the ice cream. So they're learning to use words to
Oh,
like,
cool.
like interact
Yes.
with their customers. So like she invites like different teachers to come in and buy ice cream from them.
Yeah,
I
I
love
love
that.
that.
And
Like,
something like that, like even if you're not using real ice cream, even if it's play food, like that could really get them talking because kids love to pretend that
yes.
they're like working at an ice
Yes.
cream store or like writing letters and somebody gets to be the mailed like the postal worker and like deliver the letters to
So
their
much.
parents or something.
And when they don't feel like they're working or,
Mhm.
learning or doing school stuff, it just feels like play. But
Fun.
that's
Yeah.
speech language development and all, like you said, the social interaction and the conflict resolution. Like going back to kind of once that pendulum, things that kindergartners used to do.
Yeah.
We don't have time to do with our new standards, and that's why I said try to tie it into like a rainy day fun activity or
Mhm.
Friday fun center
Yeah.
to make it more regular part of the activity. So,
Yeah.
and this is stuff that all the kids need and
Yeah,
really
Yeah.
they do.
You're right. Yeah. Even if they're monolingual or multilingual, yeah, all the kids can benefit from
autistic
it.
and regular ed, all
Mhm.
that they're missing out on a lot of these conversations and experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay. Yeah. Lucy, do you want to add anything else or?
No, I think that was pretty good summary of all our strategies.
You
Yeah.
did summarize that for us. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.